The idea that if an incoming president wants 60 days to free spending, not all spending, spending on controversial programs, because Biden and his regime was pushing so much money out near the end, and they say, wait, we need a 60-day reprieve so we can take a look at that. The idea that he can't do it, and on and on and on, because a cabal of judges, specifically coming from communities that were picked by the litigants, by these Democrat attorneys general in 20 or so states, by the union bosses, also Democrats. Notice these cases are in Boston, Providence, Rhode Island, Washington, D.C., Seattle, Washington. Notice that these cases are in the most radical left-wing communities possible, because that's where most of these radical left-wing federal judges are. The media, the Washington ruling class, that would be the Democrats for the most part, but some Republicans, mostly the Democrats. The bureaucracy, said the media, the judges represent the ruling class. They are entrenched. Judges are unelected. Bureaucrats are unelected. The media are unelected. So the bulk of their power comes not from the ballot box, but from secreting themselves into a system that they've created. They've effectively created their own legal system to protect their bureaucracy, to protect what they've built with the help of some Republicans. This edifice of a massive government. If you ever come to Washington, D.C., many of you have, and you drive down the streets, building after building after building after building, that's just the tip of the iceberg. This unelected government that doesn't even exist in your Constitution has more power than the elected parts of the government. But so do the unelected judges. Now, that doesn't mean I favor direct democracy in every respect. No, that's not a republic. And that is a democracy that will fail. Your Constitution doesn't believe in direct democracy. The only vote you have to directly elect people is the House of Representatives. All the rest of it is through representation or through appointment, and there's a reason for that. You have tyranny by mobocracy, and you have tyranny by dictatorship. And your republic was set up to avoid both, and has lasted pretty well up until now. Well, what's happening here is the key to our Constitution is separation of powers. We've talked about this at length. I've written about it at length. This is something that was important to John Locke, important to Montesquieu. Others talked about it and wrote about it to some extent. Thomas Hobbes, Thomas Aquinas, all of them. But Montesquieu was the one that had the greatest impact on our Constitution. He's cited in the Federalist Papers on a few occasions as well. Power, checking power. The idea that unelected judges, right after a landslide election, are going to determine what will be on a government website, are going to determine how a president decides how many federal employees are needed and whether or not he can give severance as a way of trying to thin out the numbers. The idea that a president cannot have access to the data at the Treasury Department to determine if there are bills being paid that shouldn't be paid, billions of dollars going out without the necessary checks and security measures. The idea that a president can't restructure an agency, AID, USAID, move it within the State Department and have a reduction in force, what we used to call RIF, in order to save money and create efficiencies, and I go on and on and on, is outrageous. I favor an independent judiciary. I do not favor a judicial tyranny. This is judicial tyranny. There's simply no constitutional authority at all for any court to micromanage the executive this way. It is a clear usurpation of separation of powers in the executive functions. Of everybody I just mentioned, the only one mentioned and specifically created in the United States Constitution is the president. There is no fourth branch of government. There's no federal district courts. That's created by Congress under the Judiciary Act, signed off by a president. All these lower courts and appellate courts are created by statute. Only the Supreme Court's created by the Constitution. We've talked about that. The idea that an unelected lawyer, they're all lawyers, by putting on a black robe, can tell a president that basically they're going to run the human resources aspects of the federal government, or they're going to determine in a case-by-case basis whether the president and his people can have access to data that his branch of government's collecting on people in order to determine whether these payments are legitimate and to conduct an audit. The idea that if an incoming president wants 60 days to free spending, not all spending, spending on controversial programs, because Biden and his regime was pushing so much money out near the end, and they say, wait, we need a 60-day reprieve so we can take a look at that. The idea that he can't do it, and on and on and on, because a cabal of judges, specifically coming from communities that were picked by the litigants, by these Democrat attorneys general in 20 or so states, by the union bosses, also Democrats. Notice these cases are in Boston, Providence, Rhode Island, Washington, D.C., Seattle, Washington. Notice that these cases are in the most radical left-wing communities possible, because that's where most of these radical left-wing federal judges are. We actually had the chief judge of the district courts in Boston shockingly say, since so many of these cases are winding up in Boston, I'm going to move some of these cases out. They'll be determined by a lottery throughout the state of Massachusetts, not just in the city of Boston. They were having one judge basically handle all these cases that are being filed, because they're filing them in multiple jurisdictions where they have all these friendly judges. But this chief judge says, we can't even manage it in Boston. Think about this. Democrat petitioners, mostly, not exclusively, Democrat judges. What kind of justice is that? It is a justice system, as Frederick Bastiat spoke about. I read you that quote. A justice system, a legal system set up by the very people to protect them, their turf, their wealth, and their power. This is, I'll say again, a battle between the ruling class and we the people. It's not an economic battle, like some kind of a Marxist construct. It's not a populist battle, the working class versus the rich. Last time I checked, Elon Musk wasn't from the working class. Certainly not now. Nor is Donald Trump. And yet look what they're fighting for. No, this is a power issue, not an economics issue, not a Marxist materialism issue. You know, Mises said, and I've told you this, that Americans now talk like Marxists and think like Marxists, and this class warfare stuff, the oppressed and the oppressor, involving materialism and economics. This is not that. That happens, but this is not that. It's the oppressed versus the oppressor, all right, but it is the ruling class, the incompetent, all-powerful ruling class, that is protecting itself, that has made sure that they appointed judges that will protect them, that have their own, effectively, legal system that they've created. People running around said, this is unconstitutional, unconstitutional. What are they talking about? What's unconstitutional? The executive branch is allowed to control the executive branch. The president's allowed to manage the people who are under him, who only exist because he's president of the United States. He's free to do that. Now, there might be statutes that he has to follow that a president may have signed in the past, but we're not talking about that. They're waving around the Constitution. Oh, that's unconstitutional. We have a Constitution. I got to listen to stupid, low IQ know-nothings like Caitlin Collins on CNN. Spends 10 minutes talking about we're on the precipice of a constitutional crisis. Then brings in this slob, Chris Murphy, who somehow becomes a senator. You got to wonder how 90% of them become senators, but there they are. She was more radical than Chris Murphy, who's a kook, who's a crackpot.
For all this and much more, sign up for Levin TV.